Jesus said in our gospel today, "I have come to set the earth on fire," and he did set it on fire. Jesus came here to earth in human form and changed everything. You see, the Jewish people had been expecting a Messiah forever, and Isaiah had prophesied about Jesus specifically 700 years before. And when Jesus arrived and began his ministry, for those that converted and followed, it was truly a life-changing event. I mean, think about it. You're Jewish, your parents are Jewish, your grandparents, great-grandparents, great-great-grandparents, your ancestors, all the way back to the time of Abraham, had all been Jewish. They'd been following the one true God all that time, living your faith, observing the Jewish religion, keeping the Jewish commandments. The faith that was passed down from generation to generation, the one true faith of God's chosen people. And Jesus then bursts onto the scene. And he's preaching in the temple and in the countryside and on the mountains and by the sea. He's teaching in people's homes and in their fields and on the streets. He's healing the sick. He's forgiving people's sins. He's showing through his words and actions that everything that you've grown up with, everything that you've been taught, everything that your ancestors have followed all these thousands of years might not be the be-all, end-all of following God. He's showing through his words and deeds that some of what your religion has become might not be the best way to follow God. He's showing through his words and deeds that the way you've been taught to follow God might not actually be in accordance with God's commandments. You see, Jesus is showing through his words and his deeds that your church might have become a little too institutional, a little too high priesty, a little too pharisaical, a little too clerical, a little too much of an economic enterprise. Sometimes looking more like a marketplace or a business venture, a financial juggernaut in the community, rather than a house of worship, rather than God's house of worship for sure. And when you start to realize that Jesus is the Messiah spoken of in the Old Testament, when you start to realize that he is here in the flesh to teach you how to really follow God, when you realize that he is here to save not only your soul, but all of humanity, when you realize that Jesus is the Son of God, sent here to save us all, it would be a truly life-changing event. Your heart would be on fire, your life would be on fire, the earth would be on fire. And it would cause divisions. It would cause divisions in society, divisions within families, divisions, not peace. You see, when I came out as Catholic to my Southern Baptist parents, they were happy. They were happy that I was going to some kind of Christian church. They probably would have preferred some kind of Protestantism, but they were content with any Christian faith. If I had turned out to be a member of some group that was following some obscure carpenter's son from the boondocks who only showed up last week and started talking crazy, they probably wouldn't have been as supportive. There would have been some division in our family, and I can see that how following Jesus at that time, in that place, could easily turn a household against one another. It's easy to see how it would turn the entire society against itself. Because Jesus and his followers were doing crazy stuff. They were dining with tax collectors and sinners, sitting down to socialize with some of the lowest lowlifes around, shunning the rich and the powerful, the elite of society, selling all they owned, leaving their livelihoods behind, to walk around the earth spreading this news, this message, following what they called the way. They were acting like money and power and prestige didn't matter. And Jesus' radical teachings, they were so different than what the larger society was teaching at the time. Love your enemies. Pray for those who persecute you. Welcome the stranger. Provide for the poor and needy. Feed the hungry. Care for the sick. Love your neighbor. Jesus was teaching that the lowest members of society, the people that nobody cared about, were just as precious to God as the people at the top. They were just as precious as the people at the top who did everything the right way. Jesus was teaching that God cared just as much for the one lost, wayward sheep as he did for all the good little sheep who stayed where they were supposed to. Jesus was teaching that God is a loving and merciful God who gave his only son to die a terrible, horrific, agonizing death on a cross to pay the price for all of our sins, all the ones that we have already done and all the ones that we haven't even thought of yet. Jesus was teaching how to follow God. And he was teaching that we can't follow both God and money. Oh yes, Jesus set the world on fire. That would have been a wild and exciting time to be alive. Dangerous to be sure, scary at times. But Jesus was in your heart, and he was in your soul, and he was in your mind. And it didn't matter what people thought. It didn't matter if it was popular. It didn't matter if it was how Mama and Daddy thought. It didn't matter if it was what the priest down in the temple thought. It didn't matter if it was good for your professional life or for your financial situation or your reputation or your status in the community. You are part of that fire that Jesus brought, that burning desire to love God and love your neighbor. That fire in your belly to serve others in Jesus' name, that unquenchable flame to spread the good news. That would have really been something to be a part of. What a time to be alive. It's not like that now, of course. We're deeply embedded in society now. We aren't outsiders anymore. We aren't following a different way anymore. We're following the world's way. You see, we've figured out how to defend ourselves from our enemies. We figured out how to deal with those that would try to persecute us. We have figured out which strangers to welcome and which ones to build a wall for. We've figured out that the poor and the needy ought to get off drugs and get a job. We figured out that the hungry should have budgeted their food stamps better and the sick should have gotten better health insurance. We figured out that fences are what make good neighbors. We figured out that the lowest members of society are down there for a reason, probably their own doing, and there's a reason that no one cares about them. We figured out how to serve both God and money. You see, we figured out that you can't walk away from your career to love and serve the Lord. That's ridiculous. And we have figured out that Jesus is bad for business. So we figured out that we can leave the Lord at home while we go out there to our career. And that when Jesus isn't in the way, then we can make all of those stone cold business decisions that have to be made. We can do the things that we have to in order to be successful. In the church, we figured out how to be an institutional church again, complete with Pharisees. A little too high priesty, a little too clerical, a little too concerned with financial solvency. We have figured out how to contain that fire, compartmentalize that burning spirituality, so that it doesn't interfere with our day-to-day operations. We've all figured out how to throw a little water on Jesus' fire, so that we can succeed in society, so that there won't be divisions between us that might interfere with our career or our future or our bottom line. Gotten pretty good at keeping that fire contained. But we do have to watch out, because if we're not careful, Jesus will still speak to us. He'll still teach all those same things that he taught the people of Israel, how to love and serve the Lord, how to love and care for those around us, how to be his disciple. Jesus will still tell us his will for our lives. He will still speak his truth to us. He will still show us how to follow his way rather than the world's way. He's still teaching all that stuff, if we're willing to listen. So watch out, because if he ever lights that fire in us, really lights it, then we're not going to be able to put it out. And it will totally change our life. We won't be able to compartmentalize our spirituality. We won't be able to leave Christianity at home. We won't be able to serve both God and money. We won't be able to be part of the machine anymore. Because when Jesus sets our world on fire, we won't be able to look the other way on injustice. We won't be able to justify our hard-hearted actions because they were a smart financial decision. We won't be able to promote sound economic policy while totally disregarding human suffering. We won't be able to ignore the lowest members of society, even if they don't deserve attention. We won't be able to keep all of our friends because a lot of them are not going to understand what we're talking about. We're going to sound crazy. You see, we always forget in our society based on mammon that when Jesus says feed the hungry and care for the sick, he knows it's not economically prudent. Jesus knows that welcoming the stranger is going to be a tremendous financial burden. Jesus knows that selling all we own and traveling the earth, spreading the good news, does not come with a 401k retirement plan. Jesus knows that associating with lowlifes will hurt our own social status. Jesus knows that loving our enemies and praying for those that persecute us is likely to get us beaten up by those same enemies and persecutors. Jesus knows that his way is likely to leave us poorer, weaker, more vulnerable, and less popular with the larger society. Jesus knows his way does not fit in with our world's value system. Jesus knows his way is hard. Jesus knows his way will cause division and strife. And he knows that we can't do it without him. That's why he's always with us, lifting us up, protecting us, providing for us when we think all is lost, walking with us on our journey, and carrying us when we can't walk anymore. But his way is hard. His way takes faith. His way will truly turn our world upside down. We just have to let him. We just have to let him change us. We just have to trust him. We just have to let him set the earth on fire. You see, Jesus said in his gospel today, "And oh, how I wish that it was already blazing." Me too, Lord. Me too.